My name is Paul LaRuffa, and in 2002, I survived a violent attack on my life, which turned out to be related to the sniper attacks that happened that year. I was pretty close to death, and I survived, and I don't feel better about the perpetrator of the crime being incarcerated for the rest of his life if he was honestly rehabilitated.
In 2002, John Allen Muhammad and Lee Boyd Malvo killed and injured numerous people across the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. Lee Boyd Malvo was only 17 years old at the time. He had met Muhammad when he was 15, and soon after, he was taken under Muhammad's wing and isolated from his mother. Before their attacks started, Muhammad and Malvo robbed and attempted to kill Paul LaRuffa. They would later use his money to buy a car and used Paul's laptop to plan their attacks.
On September the 5th, 2002, was a Thursday night. I left my restaurant. I would never leave alone, always leave with people for security reasons. I went to my car. The other two individuals went to their cars. Before I could do anything, the window next to my head exploded and shattered glass all over me. Simultaneously, the bang was really loud, deafened my left ear, and 4 more shots came in just a matter of a few seconds, and they all hit me. After the shots, it became incredibly quiet. I raised myself up in the seat. I was conscious. I could stand up, so I got out of the car. And luckily, as I got out of the car, I turned around towards my left and saw the other person that I left with coming towards me. He called 911. He stayed there with me. I said a couple of times, I don't want to die in a parking lot. The emergency people arrived. I kept telling them in the ambulance, I'm having trouble breathing. And they said, we know, we'll be there soon. And when we got to the hospital, it was just like a movie. I mean, there were a staff of people waiting. They gave me a shot. I was just completely paralyzed. I couldn't open my eyes, but I could hear them talking. And all I thought of was, I don't want to hear them say anything bad. And I didn't. They didn't say, he's a goner, or, he's going to die.
Paul spent over a week in the hospital. 3 of those days were in the intensive care unit. He showed steady improvement physically, but he was still living through the attack emotionally and mentally.
I had unbelievable nightmares and flashbacks, just horrible. It was really hard for me to sleep, and when I did sleep, I knew they were coming, and I knew that shot. I would hear that shot again.
Paul convinced the doctors to let him go home after a week, even though one lung was still not fully healed. Paul spent the rest of the autumn recuperating physically, mentally, and emotionally. Like others in the Washington, D.C. area, he heard about the attacks whose perpetrators were called the D.C. snipers and remained alert. It wasn't until Malvo and Muhammad were caught that he found that they were also responsible for his attack.
At a point after it was settled that I knew who did it, mentally I felt better. Really, from that point on, I never had any more problems, either mentally or physically.
Lee Boyd Malvo was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole in prison in Virginia and Maryland for his role in the attacks. Years later, Paul LaRuffa would become connected to the Campaign for the Fair Sentencing of Youth, or CFSY, an organization working to end life without parole as a sentencing option for children, and offer support to formerly life-sentenced children and survivors of crime.
When I got involved with CFSY, I learned what they were doing. They want to spread the information that children are different than adults, and that applies to the area of crime and punishment. I agree with the base premise, try to get life without parole sentences banned in every state.
It was through meeting formerly incarcerated youth at the CFSY, like Eddie Ellis, that Paul decided to advocate to end life without parole and other extreme sentences for children.
Paul, when I was 16, went to jail for murder on self-defense in Washington, D.C., and I faced 75 years to life in prison because of my actions. The moment I found out that he lost his life, something came upon me that I never felt before in my life. You know, my father was killed when I was a kid, and it really hurt me knowing that someone lost their life because of me. Going through court was so difficult for me as a child. Emotionally, I was dealing with what has taken place, and someone lost their life.
When I first met Eddie, he's an outgoing, friendly guy. It just amazes me that somebody could go through what he went through, being in prison for whatever, 10 years or more. I'm really amazed that he's so positive about helping other people. But he knows what they go through. I will never know what it's like to be in prison.
If I know I can change, it's other people who can change. And that's what was one of the things that was important to me. If I can give some energy to other people, then I came in contact with the campaign, ICAN.
Eddie has now been staff at the CFSY for several years and works closely with others who were incarcerated as children and with people impacted by youth violence like Paul. Through building relationships with people like Eddie, Paul went from believing life without parole was a just sentence for a child to advocating for its abolition. He testified before his representatives in Maryland in favor of abolishing life without parole for children in 2020.
I would only leave you with one question. Do you feel comfortable with children spending the rest of their life in prison?
Obviously, I don't feel the same way as I did then toward the idea of life without parole, because not everybody has killed 10 people, and there are thousands of people, young people in prison that did a lot less and are condemned to spend the rest of their life in jail with no hope. I always am asked, or people express after it happened, they said, well, things happen for a reason, and God has a plan for you. Maybe that's what this is. Getting in contact and being involved with this justice system and changing the justice system. Maybe that's the reason.
To learn more about children and the legal system and hear more stories from survivors of youth violence, visit our website, cfsy.org.